My mom said, "You're my dad."
Why do you have this photo?
Chicago in a whiteout. Alexander Carter, a driven CEO, any man who worked too hard and loved too late, steps from a wind energy boardroom into the storm. A boy shivers on Michigan Avenue selling papers. His coat slips, an old photograph of the woman Alexander lost flickers in the snow. Regret stings. He kneels, heart racing. If the past finds him in the cold, will he risk everything for one second chance? The lake hissed under ice as wind hammered the glass of Alexander Carter's mansion on Lakeshore Drive. Chicago's winter pressed against the windows like a living thing. He stood in the quiet, a tall, muscular man in a navy suit and red tie, his deep blue eyes reflecting the white roar outside. Success lined every shelf around him, awards for pushing wind power onto the grid, but his gaze stayed on a single empty frame he never filled. He had stopped pretending he didn't know why. The space was shaped like her name. He crossed the room, past a fireplace throwing orange light, and opened a drawer. The small velvet pouch lay where he'd left it. Inside, the silver pendant caught the firelight, the one Claire used to wear on a thin chain when she laughed on summer evenings by the lake. His jaw tightened. He lifted it, let it rest in his palm, then closed his fingers because the room felt suddenly colder. "Car's ready, sir," his assistant called from the foyer. Jenna's voice was steady, professional, almost protective. "Board wants an answer tonight." "They always do," he said, slipping the pendant back into the pouch. "Tell them I'm on my way." The mansion's foyer smelled like cedar in winter. Jenna held out his charcoal overcoat and gloves. "Forecast says whiteout conditions. We could reschedule." He shook his head. "Wind doesn't reschedule. Neither do contracts." Her expression softened. "It's the holidays. You could let someone else take the heat." "I already did," he said, meaning more than work. He caught himself, softened his tone. "I'll be back after the vote." He stepped into the limousine. Lake Michigan was a bruised sheet beyond the shoulder of the road, whipped to white by the gale. Downtown rose ahead, lights smeared by blowing snow. He watched turbines far out on the water, their black blades turning slow, stubborn against the storm. He'd staked his life on harnessing the wind, on building something that made the cold less cruel for strangers. It had not kept him warm. The boardroom sat 40 floors above the city. All glass and clean lines, a model turbine humming in the corner like a patient heart. The CFO spoke first. "Margins on the North Shore retrofit are narrowing. If we hire union crews, we miss the bid." A murmur of agreement. A dissenting director cleared his throat. "Or we pass. Focus on utility-scale farms, not neighborhoods." Alexander let the voices roll and waited for quiet. "People are freezing 3 miles from here," he said, calm but edged. "Our mission isn't just megawatts. It's heat in a little girl's bedroom when the wind screams. We'll keep the union crews. We'll take the neighborhoods. If margins tighten, I'll cut my bonus before I cut a blanket off a child." Silence. Then the chair nodded. Motion carried. Afterward, he lingered alone at the glass. Snow erased streets and softened edges, turned the river into a pale ribbon. His reflection floated over the storm, older than he remembered. He pressed a knuckle to the glass. It was like knocking on the past. He had not seen Claire in years. Not after the last fight, the last slammed door, the summer he chose a turbine field in Wyoming over a weekend that shouldn't have mattered, but did. She vanished like a shoreline in fog. No scandal, no farewell, just absence. He told himself she did him a favor, that focus required clean lines. But grief collects in corners, and tonight it was everywhere. Jenna appeared in the doorway, softer now. "You did the right thing, Alex." "About the cruise," he said, as if they both didn't hear the rest. "About remembering why you started," she said. "I'll have the driver pull around." He nodded, grabbed his overcoat and paused. The pendant weighed in his pocket. He almost left it in the drawer again. Instead, he kept it. Some things you never stop carrying, even when they hurt. The elevator hummed down. In the lobby, a revolving door spun slow in the wind, each turn letting in a blade of cold. He tugged his gloves tight. Through the glass, the city blurred under a white curtain. A plow growled by, sparks jumping where steel met pavement. He could take the car, slip back to the lake, let silence swallow him whole. He pushed the door anyway. The storm took him in one hard breath. Snow stung his face, gathered on his lashes. He braced into it and heard, far off, a thin voice riding the wind, a sound that didn't belong to steel or engines at all. The storm had only worsened by the time Alexander Carter stepped out of the steel and glass tower that bore his company's name. Wind ripped across Michigan Avenue, snow driving sideways beneath the street lamps. His board had argued for hours about federal contracts, subsidies, and the looming merger. Numbers had been tossed like weapons, but Alexander's mind was elsewhere. Every decision felt mechanical, hollow. He pulled his wool coat tighter, his polished shoes crunching against the frozen sidewalk. Even for a man with the chauffeurs and penthouses, the cold reached him. It had a way of cutting through armor, through titles, through pride. That's when he saw him. A boy, no more than 9, stood near the curb, stacks of newspapers tucked under his arm. His thin frame was lost inside a frayed coat, its zipper broken, the fabric stiff with ice. Snowflakes clung to his lashes as he called out hoarsely, "Evening edition! Get your paper!" Alexander slowed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen a child working a corner like this in Chicago's downtown. The sight unsettled him. At this hour, in this storm, the boy should have been home, tucked beneath blankets, not shivering on a frozen street. Their eyes met briefly. The boy's were startling. Gray, flecked with green, sharp with determination that seemed older than his years. He pressed forward against the wind, extending a paper toward a passing man in a fur-lined coat. The man brushed him aside, muttering, "Get off the street, kid." The boy's chin lifted, defiant despite the rebuke. He tried again with the next passer-by. No luck. Still, he didn't leave his post. Something twisted inside Alexander. He was used to resilience. He had built his empire on it, but to see it burning inside a child made him pause. Against his own better judgment, he approached. "How much for a paper?" Alexander asked, his deep voice carrying over the wind. The boy blinked up at him, surprised that anyone had stopped. 50 cents, sir." His voice cracked, raw from the cold, yet polite. Alexander reached for his wallet, pulling out a crisp bill. The boy hesitated, then shook his head firmly. "It's 50 cents, that's all." Alexander studied him. Most children would have snatched the bill without question, but this one. He held on to dignity, even in the snow. Alexander slid 2 quarters into the boy's mittened hand and accepted the paper. For a moment, he considered walking on. His driver was waiting. His schedule demanded it. But as the boy shifted the stack of papers under his arm, his coat fell open. Something caught Alexander's eye. A corner of worn paper, tucked carefully into the lining, fluttered in the wind. Not newsprint. Not an advertisement. A photograph. Through the swirling snow, Alexander glimpsed the faded image of a woman. Claire. Her face younger, softer, holding a baby bundled against her chest. Alexander's breath froze in his lungs. His heart pounded like the storm itself. The boy tugged his coat closed again, unaware of what had just been revealed. "Thank you for buying, sir," he said quickly, turning toward the next passerby. But Alexander no longer heard the wind, or the shouts, or the traffic sloshing past. He could only see that photo, Claire, the woman who had disappeared from his life, taking every piece of his heart with her, and the child in her arms, the boy he'd just met. Alexander's grip on the newspaper tightened. His pulse thundered in his ears. Could it be? After all these years, had fate thrown him face to face with the truth he'd been too blind to see? The snow whirled around him, but Alexander Carter stood rooted to the sidewalk, unable to move, unable to breathe. Snow slashed across Michigan Avenue, coating everything in white. Alexander Carter stood frozen, the newspaper limp in his gloved hand, his eyes locked on the boy. He couldn't unsee it, that weathered photograph peeking from the child's coat. Claire, smiling faintly, holding a baby. His breath caught in his throat. The boy shifted uncomfortably, as if sensing the weight of Alexander's stare. "Sir, do you want the rest of your change?" His small hand opened, offering 2 dimes. Alexander shook his head slowly. His voice rasped. "No. Keep it." The boy gave a polite nod, already turning to another passer-by, but Alexander stepped closer, his voice low, almost trembling. "That picture. In your coat. May I see it?" The boy stiffened, instinctively tugging the coat tighter against him. "It's nothing. Just something my mom gave me." His tone carried both pride and fierce protection, like a soldier guarding a secret. Alexander crouched to his level, the snow gathering on his dark hair and shoulders. "Please," he said gently. "I won't take it from you. I only want to look." The boy hesitated. Then, with a small sigh, he unzipped the coat just enough. The faded photo slipped into view again, creased from years of being handled, but unmistakable. Claire's face, younger, luminous, and in her arms, a baby boy with eyes half closed. Alexander's stomach lurched. Every detail screamed of truth, the slope of Claire's cheek, the curve of her smile. He swallowed hard, his voice unsteady. Where did you get this?" The boy clutched the photo close. "It's my mom's. She says it's all we've got. She keeps it safe, but I carry it now. For luck." His gray-green eyes studied Alexander, wary yet oddly familiar. "Why do you care?" Alexander's heart hammered. The cadence of his words, the tilt of his chin, small details that mirrored his own reflection from decades ago. He forced himself to steady his voice. "Because I knew her a long time ago." The boy's brows furrowed. "You knew my mom?" "Yes," Alexander whispered. "Her name is Claire." The boy's lips parted. Startled. "She never tells people her name. Not strangers." Wind howled between them, but Alexander barely noticed. He searched the boy's face, the same stubborn line of the jaw, the same fire in his eyes. He felt both awe and dread rising inside him. Is she well?" Alexander asked carefully. The boy shook his head, and for the first time his voice faltered. "She's sick. Real sick. That's why I sell papers. For her medicine." His thin shoulders squared, as if bracing himself. "It's just me and her." Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him. All the years he'd buried behind contracts, mergers, and hollow victories rushed back like a tide. He wanted to speak, to tell the boy what surged in his chest, but his throat closed. The boy zipped his coat shut again, shielding the photo. "I should go. If I don't sell enough, we can't pay the doctor." Alexander reached out instinctively, his gloved hand brushing the boy's arm. "Wait." His voice was urgent, almost pleading. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. Snow gathered on his lashes before he finally answered. "Noah!" The name struck Alexander like a bell in his chest. Familiar, biblical, anchoring. He drew a sharp breath. Noah. The child Claire had once whispered she would name if she ever had a son. Alexander's vision blurred with the storm. This couldn't be coincidence. This boy wasn't a stranger at all, and deep down, Alexander knew this was his son. The wind clawed at Alexander's coat as he knelt in the snow, his eyes locked on the boy. Noah. The name echoed through him like a hymn half remembered. His throat tightened, but he forced out words. "Noah, may I ask you something?" The boy shifted, uneasy. "I don't talk to strangers." Alexander managed a faint, pained smile. "Then let's not be strangers. My name is Alexander." His voice broke softly. "I knew your mother a long time ago." Noah studied him, suspicion flickering across his young face. He hugged the stack of newspapers tighter, as if they were armor. Mom doesn't like when people ask questions. She says we're fine on our own. Alexander's chest ached. He wanted to say, "You're not on your own anymore. I should have been there," but the words wouldn't form. Instead, his eyes drifted to the coat. "That photo, your mother looks very young in it." Noah's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "She said it was taken the day I was born. She keeps it close because she says it's proof we were loved once." The boy's chin lifted in quiet defiance, his gray-green eyes narrowing as if daring Alexander to question it. "But if that man in the picture loved us, he left. Mom said he walked away." The words struck like ice against Alexander's skin. He steadied his breath, fighting back the rush of guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. His voice softened. "Sometimes people make mistakes they regret forever." Noah glanced down at the snow. "Mistakes don't buy medicine. I have to work." He turned to go, his small frame swallowed by the storm. Alexander reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the boy's shoulder lightly. "Please, just tell me, how is she? How is your mother?" The boy's lips pressed tight, and for a moment Alexander feared he would stay silent. Then Noah whispered, "She's sick, real sick. Some nights she can't even stand, but she tells me not to worry." His voice cracked. "So I just sell papers." The cadence of the boy's voice, the way he squared his shoulders despite the tremble, it was like watching his own reflection from decades ago. Alexander swallowed hard, his vision blurring with snow and memory. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. Noah shook his head, eyes suddenly sharp again. "I can't tell you. Mom says not to trust anyone. She says people disappear when we trust the wrong ones." He pulled away, clutching the newspapers like a shield. Alexander's heart sank. Noah. But the boy had already turned, trudging through the storm, his small figure swallowed by flurries and neon glare. Alexander stayed on his knees, snow soaking his trousers, the newspaper crumpled in his fist. His breath came in ragged bursts. The photo. Claire. Noah. The city roared around him, honking taxis, the hiss of snow against glass. But he heard none of it, only Noah's voice. "Mom said you left us." His hand drifted to his pocket, where the silver pendant still rested. The one Claire had once worn close to her heart. For years he'd carried it as a reminder of love lost. Now, paired with that faded photograph, it was no longer just a relic, it was a bridge. Alexander rose slowly, his tall frame swaying against the wind. The truth clawed inside him. He had a son. Claire had raised him alone, through storms harsher than this one, and Alexander had been blind, consumed by his empire. The snow thickened, erasing Noah's small tracks. Alexander stood in the blur of the storm, whispering to no one. "God, what have I done?" Sleep never came that night. Alexander Carter paced the length of his lakefront penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows rattling under the weight of the blizzard. Beyond the glass, Lake Michigan was a black, restless void, but his thoughts were louder than the storm. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Noah's face, the familiar tilt of his chin, the guarded fire in his eyes, and that photograph of Claire holding a baby. He poured a glass of water, set it down untouched, then pulled out his phone. For years, he had avoided digging into the past. Tonight, he couldn't stop himself. With one sharp breath, he dialed. "Stanton," a gruff voice answered after 2 rings. The man was private, discreet, and one of the best investigators in Chicago. Alexander had used him before, quietly, for matters the press must never touch. "It's Carter," Alexander said, his voice low. "I need someone found. A woman. And fast." A pause, then Stanton's tone shifted. "Name?" "Claire Whitmore. She lived here in Chicago years ago. She disappeared. I think she has a son, 9 years old." His throat tightened. "His name is Noah. Whitmore. 9-year-old boy." Stanton repeated, already scribbling. You want current address, records, health status? All of it, Alexander said. His gaze dropped to the silver pendant in his palm, its chain wound tight around his fingers. And be discreet. No one can know you're working for me. You'll have something within 72 hours, Stanton promised. Alexander ended the call but didn't move. He stared at the pendant until his vision blurred. His empire, his board, his contracts, none of it mattered tonight. Only Claire, only Noah. 3 days later, Stanton returned with answers. Alexander sat in his office, the city stretched in gray beyond the windows, when the door opened quietly. Stanton stepped in. Coat damp from the melting snow, and set a manila envelope on the desk. His expression was unusually grim. You were right to ask, Stanton said. She's still in Chicago, not far, south side. Alexander's chest tightened. And? Stanton hesitated. She's sick. Records show multiple hospital visits. The last one, 2 weeks ago, she collapsed at work. Pneumonia, maybe worse, and she's raising the boy alone. No husband listed, no partner, just her and Noah. The words struck like hammer blows. Alexander reached for the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside were photographs. Grainy shots of a modest apartment building, its bricks stained with age. Another of Claire stepping out one evening, her frame thinner than he remembered, her shoulders hunched beneath a worn coat. And beside her, Noah, clutching her hand, his small body shielded against the wind. Alexander's throat burned. He traced Claire's face with his thumb. Time had changed her, but the strength in her eyes was the same strength he had once fallen in love with. She doesn't have insurance, Stanton continued, his voice measured. Hospital bills are stacked. She works part-time when she can, but it's not enough. The boy sells papers, odd jobs. They're hanging on by a thread. Alexander pressed a hand to his forehead, guilt flooding him. All his years chasing wind farms and boardroom victories, while Claire had been here, fighting storms alone, while Noah grew up without him. Do you want me to dig deeper? Stanton asked. Alexander shook his head slowly, voice rough. No, I'll handle it from here. When Stanton left, Alexander sat alone, the city lights flickering beneath him. He spread the photographs across his desk. His empire spanned continents. He could summon entire industries with a phone call. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt powerless. He whispered into the empty room, his voice breaking. Claire, what did I do to us? The hospital air was sharp with disinfectant, the kind of sterile cold that even heated vents couldn't soften. Alexander Carter moved quietly down the corridor, his overcoat still damp from snow. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't asked permission. He only knew Claire had collapsed here days ago. His heart pounded with every step, each fluorescent light flickering like an accusation overhead. He found her in a curtained-off room near the end of the ward. She lay against thin white sheets, her face pale, cheekbones sharper than he remembered. Dark strands of hair clung to her forehead. An IV dripped slowly beside her. For a moment, Alexander froze in the doorway, unable to breathe. Time had moved mercilessly, but he could still see the woman he once loved. At her bedside sat Noah, his small hands folded over a battered book. His coat lay on the chair beside him, the corner of that faded photograph peeking from the pocket. He looked up as Alexander entered, eyes narrowing. You again. His voice was steady, but his chin trembled faintly. Alexander swallowed hard. I wanted to see her, just to make sure. His voice trailed. Noah stood, positioning himself between the bed and Alexander, protective, defiant. She doesn't need strangers bothering her. Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to say, I'm not a stranger, I'm your father, but he couldn't, not without proof, not without shattering what little ground they stood on. Instead, he knelt, lowering his voice. I don't mean harm, I promise. Claire stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering. Noah turned back instantly, gripping her hand. "Mom, it's okay. Just rest." Her lips parted, her voice a rasp. "Noah." "Who's there?" Noah hesitated, then muttered, "Just someone who bought a paper, Mom." Alexander stepped closer, his throat raw. "Claire." Her eyes opened slowly, glazed with fever, but when they focused on him, she gasped. Shock, disbelief, and something deeper flashed across her face. "Alexander?" The name left her lips like a wound reopened. Noah blinked, looking between them. You know him?" Claire tried to push herself up, but weakness pulled her back. She coughed, tears stinging her eyes. "Why are you here?" Alexander's voice cracked. "Because I should never have left. Because I need to know the truth." The nurse entered briskly then, carrying a clipboard, breaking the moment. She checked Claire's vitals, adjusted the IV, and left without a word. The silence that followed pressed like stone. Claire closed her eyes again, turning her face away. "You have no right to be here." Noah clenched his fists, glaring. "If you make her upset, you leave." Alexander bowed his head, guilt consuming him. He couldn't stay, not yet. He reached into his coat and slipped an envelope onto the bedside table, his card tucked inside, along with a note that read, "I'll do whatever it takes." Then he left. Hours later, alone in his penthouse, Alexander stared at the results Stanton had rushed through. The DNA test was clear. The boy, Noah, was his son. The paper trembled in his hands. All the power, all the wealth in the world couldn't give him back those lost years. He pressed the paper to his chest, whispering into the empty room, "I'm sorry, Noah. I'm so sorry." Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights flickering beyond the glass like 1,000 indifferent eyes. The DNA report lay open on the table, its words cutting deeper than any boardroom betrayal. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Noah was his son, his blood, his legacy, and he had missed every year of his life. He pressed the paper flat with trembling hands, the edges crumpling beneath his palms. His mind whirled back. How many nights had Claire cried alone? How many winters had Noah faced without a father's hand to hold? The thought seared through him like fire. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, his voice echoing against the cold marble floor. "I built turbines to fight the wind. I built towers to reach the sky. But what good is any of it if I couldn't protect them?" For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless. Not in business, in life. A soft knock startled him. Jenna, his assistant, entered quietly, holding a folder. "You missed the call with Berlin," she said gently. Then she saw the report on the table, the rawness in his face. She hesitated. "Is that about her?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Yes, I have a son, Jenna, 9 years old, and His voice cracked. "I never knew." Jenna's eyes softened. "What will you do?" He rubbed his temple, his shoulders heavy. "What I should have done years ago. But what if it's too late? He hates me already. Claire!" She looked at me like I was a ghost she wanted to forget. Jenna stepped closer, her tone firm yet kind. "You can't rewrite the past, Alexander, but you can choose what you do now." Her words lingered after she left. He sat again, staring at the silver pendant he kept in his pocket. Claire's pendant. The one thing he had carried all these years. Proof of a love he had never truly let go. Could Noah ever forgive him? Could Claire? Hours passed in restless silence. He tried to read reports, tried to focus on the Berlin contract, but the words blurred. His mind returned again and again to Noah's voice on the snowy street. "Mom said you left us." By dawn, Alexander had made a decision. He pulled on his coat, the DNA report tucked into the inner pocket, the pendant heavy against his chest. He would not let another day pass in shadows. He drove himself through the thinning storm, his car crunching over slush and ice. until the skyline gave way to the worn blocks of the south side. The investigator's photographs had guided him here, a brick apartment building sagging with age, laundry lines frozen stiff in the alley, paint peeling from the trim. He stood outside the door for a long moment, snow melting on his shoulders, his breath clouding in the air. His hand hovered, then knocked softly. Inside, footsteps shuffled. A latch turned. The door opened. Noah stood there, hair tousled, eyes wary. Behind him, Claire's voice called weakly, "Who is it, Noah?" The boy's gaze locked on Alexander, suspicion hardening. He didn't move. Alexander swallowed the lump in his throat. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. "It's me. I'm not leaving this time." The apartment smelled faintly of boiled tea and medicine. The walls bore marks of years of struggle, peeling paint, uneven plaster, but every corner was neat, cared for. Noah stood like a guard in the doorway, his small frame tense, eyes sharp with suspicion. Alexander hesitated, then stepped inside when Noah reluctantly moved aside. The space felt smaller than it was, but maybe that was the weight of history pressing in. Claire sat on a worn sofa, bundled in a faded quilt. Even pale and frail, she carried a quiet dignity that pierced Alexander's heart. Her eyes, those same eyes that once laughed beneath summer skies, fixed on him with disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her voice carrying both weariness and steel. Alexander removed his gloves, his deep blue eyes never leaving hers. "Claire, I know now, about Noah, about everything, and I can't walk away again." Her lips tightened. "You already did. Years ago." The words stung like ice. He took a step closer, but Noah immediately moved between them, his small hand raised as if to block a giant. "We don't need you," Noah said firmly. Alexander knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. His voice shook with honesty. "You're right. You've survived without me. But you shouldn't have had to, and I'll never let you or your mom suffer the cold again." Noah clutched the faded photo from his coat, holding it like a shield. His voice cracked. "Mom said the man in this picture left us." Alexander reached into his inner pocket. Slowly, he pulled out Claire's old silver pendant, the chain coiled delicately around his hand. He held it up, the metal glinting in the dim light. "She gave me this the night before she disappeared. I kept it all these years." His eyes flicked to Claire, then back to Noah. "I never forgot, not for one day." The pendant trembled in his hand, bridging the space between them. Claire's breath hitched, her eyes glistening. "You kept it," she whispered. Noah's grip on the photo loosened, confusion breaking through his anger. He glanced from the pendant to his mother, then back to Alexander. Alexander's voice softened, carrying the weight of a vow. "I made mistakes. Pride, ambition, fear. They blinded me. But this—" He gestured to Claire, to Noah, to the pendant. "This is what matters. If you'll let me, I'll prove it. Not with words, but with the rest of my life." The room fell into silence, broken only by the rattle of the heater. Claire's eyes searched his face as though measuring whether time had changed him. Noah hugged the photo to his chest. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You'd really stay? Even if it's hard? Even if Mom gets sick again?" Alexander's throat tightened. "Especially then. I'll carry both of you through every storm." Something in Noah's eyes wavered, still guarded, but not unmovable. The boy stepped back, giving his mother space to answer. Claire looked at Alexander for a long time. Her voice was fragile but clear. "You can't erase the years, Alex. But maybe you can help write the rest." Alexander's eyes closed briefly, relief flooding him like warmth against the winter. When he opened them, his gaze met hers with a quiet vow. "I will. I promise." The heater clicked in the corner, its tired hum filling the silence. Noah stood close to his mother, clutching the faded photograph as though it were both proof and protection. His young voice was steady, but edged with hurt. "Mom said you left us." The words cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal. Alexander's chest tightened. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling, and drew out the silver pendant he had carried for nearly a decade. Its surface was scratched, but the memory it carried was unbroken. He held it out, the chain dangling between them. "Your mom gave me this the last night we were together. I kept it. Every day. Every night. It never left me." Noah frowned, his gaze fixed on the pendant. "That's Mom's," he whispered. Claire's breath caught. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You still have it?" Alexander nodded slowly. "It was the only piece of her I had left. I thought I lost everything else." He turned to Noah, his voice thick with emotion. "And now I see I almost lost you, too." Noah clutched the photo tighter, his chin quivering. "But Mom said—" "She's right," Alexander interrupted softly, kneeling so his eyes met the boys. "I wasn't there. I failed you both. That's the truth. But this," he lifted the pendant, "and that picture in your coat, they mean I was never gone here." He pressed a hand over his chest. "In here, I carried you both. Always." The boy's gray-green eyes flicked to his mother, searching. Claire's tears slid silently down her cheeks. She whispered, almost to herself, "I thought you forgot. I thought we didn't matter." Alexander's voice broke. "You mattered more than everything. More than the empire, the contracts, the boardrooms. But I was blind, Claire. I let pride take me away, and I hate myself for it." The room was quiet except for Noah's uneven breathing. He looked between the pendant and the photo, the two fragments of a story he hadn't known he was living in. His small voice wavered. "If you cared, why didn't you come back?" Alexander swallowed hard, guilt etched into every line of his face. "Because I was a coward, and because I thought maybe you'd be better off without me, but I was wrong. So wrong." He placed the pendant gently on the table beside the faded photo, letting the two tokens sit together, proof of two halves of a broken story now meeting again. Noah stared at them, his hand trembling. His lips parted, as though forming a word he wasn't ready to speak. His eyes filled, then he turned and buried his face in Claire's quilt, his small shoulders shaking. Claire reached for him, holding him close, her gaze locked on Alexander. Pain and history lingered between them, but so did something else, something fragile, like the first light after a storm. Alexander's voice, raw and steady, filled the silence. "I can't erase the years I missed, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'll never leave again." Noah turned slowly, his eyes red, his voice no more than a whisper. "You promise?" Alexander's chest heaved. He leaned forward, his hand outstretched. "Promise." Snow blanketed the city in silence, but inside Claire's apartment the air was warmer than it had been in years. Alexander Carter sat on the worn rug before the fireplace, his tall frame slightly hunched as he moved a knight across the old chessboard he'd brought from his penthouse. "Check," he said softly, a hint of playfulness in his tone. Noah squinted at the board, his small fingers hovering over the pawns. "You always set traps," he muttered. Alexander chuckled, deep and genuine, the sound unfamiliar even to himself. "Strategy, Noah. Chess teaches us to see the moves no one else notices." Noah studied the board, then glanced up slyly. "Like seeing a boy in the snow with a picture in his coat?" The words caught Alexander off guard. He felt his throat tighten but forced a smile. "Exactly like that." Claire watched from the sofa, wrapped in her quilt, her eyes soft. She hadn't spoken much since that night, but her silence was no longer edged with anger. It was contemplative, searching. Later, after Noah drifted to sleep on the couch, Alexander pulled another blanket over him. He lingered, brushing a stray lock of hair from the boy's forehead. The simple act struck him harder than any merger or deal he had ever closed. Claire's voice came quietly from behind him. "He called you Dad earlier." Alexander turned, his heart thudding. Did he mean it? Her eyes glistened. He wouldn't have said it if he didn't. The fire popped, throwing sparks that glowed for a moment before fading. Alexander sat across from her, his voice low. "Claire, I don't deserve his trust, or yours, but I swear to you I won't waste this chance." She looked at him for a long time, then glanced at Noah, curled up peacefully. He needs stability. He needs someone who won't disappear when things get hard. "I'll be here," Alexander said firmly, "through every storm." The next day, he took Noah to Millennium Park. The snow was piled high, children laughing as they raced sleds down small hills. Alexander bought Noah a new winter hat and gloves, insisting the old ones had retired. Noah pretended to roll his eyes, but his grin betrayed him. They built a snowman together near the frozen edge of the park, and when Noah toppled backward into the snow, laughing, Alexander laughed too, a sound unburdened, free. Later, as the evening fell, they walked back beneath the city lights. Noah slipped his hand into Alexander's without a word. The boy's small fingers curled around his father's, and Alexander felt a surge of warmth that no blizzard could touch. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a CEO, or a man haunted by mistakes. He was something far more important. He was a father, and when Noah looked up at him and whispered, "Good night, Dad," Alexander knew he would carry that single word for the rest of his life. By morning, the world outside buzzed with a new kind of storm. Not snow this time. Headlines. Alexander Carter's name had always carried weight in Chicago, but now it was splashed across tabloids and business pages with a sharper edge. Renewable energy titan seen with mysterious child and woman on South Side. Cameras had followed him when he left Claire's apartment, their lenses greedy for scandal. Rivals whispered that he was hiding a double life, that his clean-cut empire was built on lies. In his boardroom that afternoon, directors sat stiff, their eyes on him like judges. The CFO cleared his throat. "Alexander, the press is circling. Investors are nervous. We can't afford rumors, not with the federal contract days from signing." Alexander leaned forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the table. His deep blue eyes burned with the steadiness they hadn't seen in years. "What's being called a rumor is the truth of my life. And if truth costs us a contract, then we were never strong enough to begin with." A murmur rippled around the table. One director scoffed. "So, you'll let sentiment undo decades of work?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Family isn't sentiment. It's foundation. Without it, everything we build crumbles." After the meeting, he returned to Claire's apartment, the weight of public scrutiny following him like sleet against his back. He found Claire at the kitchen table. Bills spread before her, Noah sketching quietly at her side. Claire looked up, weary. "I saw the news." He nodded, unbuttoning his coat. "They'll make noise. They always do. And your company, won't this—" Alexander cut her off gently. "Let them say what they will. I won't hide you. Or Noah. Not anymore." Noah glanced up from his drawing, curiosity shining in his eyes. "What are they saying?" Alexander crouched beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. "They're saying I've been keeping a secret. But the truth is, I've been missing the most important part of my life. You." The boy's cheeks flushed, and for the first time, his small smile came without hesitation. But the storm outside was real. By evening, reporters gathered near the building, shouting questions. Headlines accused him of hypocrisy. How can a man claim to warm homes when he left his own in the cold? Alexander stood at the window, fists clenched. He could fight competitors in courtrooms and contracts, but this fight was different. When he turned back, Noah was staring at him, wide-eyed. "Will they take you away?" Alexander's heart broke at the fear in his son's voice. He knelt, his voice fierce but calm. "No one will ever take me away from you again." That night, Alexander drafted something new, not a press release, not a defense, but a promise. He would turn the fire of scandal into something that mattered. He would make Noah proud. The next morning, the boardroom was full, not with whispers this time, but with cameras and microphones. Reporters leaned forward, ready to tear him apart. Alexander Carter stood at the podium, tall and unflinching, his navy suit crisp, his deep blue eyes steady beneath the harsh lights. The silver pendant was tucked inside his pocket, its weight grounding him. "I've built a career fighting the cold," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "Wind turbines, clean energy, innovation. But last week, I learned the cold isn't just out there." He gestured toward the snowy skyline. "It's in hospital rooms where families can't afford heat. It's in apartments where children shiver at night. And it was in my own home, because I let pride drive me away from what mattered most." Gasps echoed through the crowd. The questions that had hounded him suddenly stilled. Alexander didn't flinch. He let the truth hang there, raw and undeniable. "This is my son, Noah," he continued, his voice thickening with emotion, "and he is the reason I will not hide anymore." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, then leaned forward. "Today, I am launching the Warm Homes Initiative. $1 billion committed to renewable heating solutions and winter shelters across Chicago and beyond. No child, no mother, no family should face the cold alone. Not while I have the power to change it." The room erupted. Shouts, flashes, chaos. But amid the storm, Alexander's eyes found Claire and Noah, seated quietly at the side. Claire's hand rested on Noah's shoulder, her gaze soft with something that looked like forgiveness. Noah sat tall, pride flickering across his young face. Later, back at the apartment, Noah tugged at Alexander's sleeve. "They were listening to you, all of them." Alexander smiled faintly, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. "They were listening to us. You gave me the courage, Noah." The boy studied him for a moment, then slipped his small hand into Alexander's. "I'm glad you're my dad." Claire stood in the doorway, her eyes shimmering. "You made the choice I never thought you would." Alexander looked at her, his voice low and steady. "I'll keep making it, Claire. Every day. For you, for him, for us." Snow still fell outside, but inside, warmth bloomed. For the first time, the cold no longer owned them. Christmas morning dawned with a quiet hush, the blizzard finally easing. The south side streets glistened under a pale winter sun, icicles catching the light like fragile glass. Inside Claire's small apartment, warmth glowed from the fireplace Alexander had insisted on repairing himself the week before. Noah scrambled from his blanket pile on the floor, his eyes wide as he saw the single box waiting near the tree, a sturdy, carefully wrapped package with a silver ribbon. He glanced up at his mother, then at Alexander, who stood beside her, his tall frame softened by the faintest smile. "Go ahead," Alexander said, his voice low but warm. Noah tore at the paper, his breath catching when he pulled out a new winter coat, navy blue, thick, lined with warmth. But when he slipped it on, his small hand brushed something in the inside pocket. Curious, he reached in and pulled out a slip of paper carefully stitched into the lining. It was the photograph, restored, pressed flat, its edges smoothed and mended. Claire's younger face beamed from the image, the baby in her arms bundled tight. Noah's eyes filled instantly. "You fixed it." His voice wavered. Alexander knelt, his broad shoulders hunched, his deep blue eyes shining. "I wanted you to carry it safely, just like I carried this." He reached into his own pocket, revealing Claire's silver pendant. He laid it gently across her palm. Two pieces of the same story, finally together. Claire's breath hitched, her fingers curling around the pendant. "After all these years." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at him. "You remembered." Alexander's voice was rough with emotion. "I never stopped. Not once." Noah clutched the coat close, the photo pressed against his chest. His small voice broke through the silence. "Does this mean—" We're a family now?" Alexander reached out, pulling Noah into his arms, holding him tight against his chest. "Yes, son. From this day on, you will never face the cold alone." Claire joined them, her hand resting gently on Alexander's shoulder. For the first time in years, her eyes softened, not with bitterness, but with fragile hope. The fire crackled, the snow outside shimmered, and in that small room, something broken began to mend. Alexander whispered to them both, his voice steady, certain. "This is our beginning." Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, the ice melting into gray puddles that reflected a softer sky. Months had passed since that blizzard night, and Alexander Carter's life had changed more than any merger or contract ever could. His mornings no longer began with urgent phone calls or flight schedules. Now, he found himself in Claire's small kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes while Noah chattered about chess strategies or sketched inventions on scrap paper. The boardrooms still called, federal contracts, billion-dollar deals, but Alexander's rhythm had shifted. He left meetings early to make Noah's school games. He traded cocktail galas for evenings spent by a crackling fire, reading bedtime stories in a voice that once only delivered corporate speeches. One evening, as twilight painted the lakefront in hues of gold, Claire stood on the balcony of Alexander's penthouse. She leaned against the railing, the silver pendant resting once more around her neck. He joined her, tall and steady, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "You've changed," she murmured, her eyes on the horizon. He kissed her hair gently, his voice low. "No, Claire. I just finally found my way back." Inside, Noah laughed at something on the floor, his small voice echoing. The sound filled the cavernous space that had once felt so hollow. When reporters asked Alexander months later what his legacy would be, he didn't speak of wind turbines, or billion-dollar initiatives, or federal contracts. He simply said, "My son taught me that power means nothing if it doesn't warm a home. My true legacy is Noah." The Warm Homes Initiative thrived, shelters rising across the Midwest powered by renewable energy. Families who once shivered now found heat and light. But in private, Alexander's greatest joy was simpler. Noah's laughter, Claire's smile, the family he thought he had lost forever. On a quiet evening, Noah tugged at Alexander's sleeve as they walked home through the park. "Dad," he said softly, "do you ever wish things were different? That you hadn't made mistakes?" Alexander looked down, his deep blue eyes glistening in the fading light. He tightened his grip on his son's hand. "Every day. But if I hadn't fallen, I might never have learned what really matters, and I might never have found you." Noah leaned against him, smiling. Claire caught up beside them, slipping her hand into Alexander's free one. Together, they walked beneath the budding trees, three shadows stretching long and unbroken. For the first time in years, Alexander Carter wasn't haunted by regret. He was guided by it, transformed by love, anchored by family. And as the city lights flickered awake behind them, he knew with certainty ambition had built his empire, but redemption had given him a home.